Francis hated animals. He loathed them. He'd cross the street to avoid a dog, especially if it was one of those little fluffy ones that ladies like to keep inside their sleeves. So when he heard that he'd been demoted to a rural posting, he cursed and he swore and he smashed his fist to the back of a ladder-back chair. The bastards. 2 more years and they wouldn't have been able to do that to him. He would have been in charge. You see, the thing is, Francis knew all about the country. He'd grown up there. So he knew about the smelly animals and the terrible food, and little roads that went nowhere. And he got out as soon as he could. It was raining when he arrived. That was to be expected in the country. The place was on its own in a wooded coombe, needlessly dank, stark, mothy and chill. He opened the door and it was evident that nobody had lived there for a very long time. Weeds had germinated in the bare hearth and then died. The place was empty, except for a strong smell of apples. He found a bowl of them, half rotten, in the pantry. That night, he went out in the early evening to get some wood, and as he was carrying it in, a little black dog came running up to him from nowhere and laughed and wiggled its rump and danced all round him. "Go away! Shoo! Bugger off!" he shouted, but it wouldn't go. It stayed with him, and when he opened the door to go back in the house, it slipped between its legs. That night when he got into bed, the dog jumped on the bed beside him, a heavy weight that would not be moved. And he turned his back, and he curled his legs away from the dog, but the dog just snuggled closer into the nook of his knees and stayed there all night. It was the birds who woke him the next morning. They're singing. They were in the bushes, they were in the trees, and most especially, they were in the ash tree that leant over the house and seemed to pour birdsong down the chimney. There was no way he could sleep. So he decided he'd get up and he'd go down to the stream and he'd get some water to drink. Walking to the stream, wet grass slapped against his bare legs. And there, in the path, right in front of him, like some collapsed great leather bag, was a toad, staring up at him, his eyes like burning gold. Francis shuddered. There was more trouble at the stream side. He dipped his fingers in the water, and fish came from nowhere to lip the ends. And he looked up, and there, in the trees, just on the other side of the water, were deer, so near he could smell dry dung on warm fur. Deeper in the woods came the sound of a pig coughing. Francis was horrified. The job was a sinecure, and there was nothing for Francis to do. He spent his days in the basic subsistent tasks, chopping wood, catching the fish that leapt into his hands from the stream, and eating the wild apples that thunked among the nettles in the woods. He'd been there about a month, maybe 2, when he had his first visitor, a man from the village who came creeping as if he feared the tangled wood. Francis was up on the hill at the back of the house, and he looked down and he could see the man coming up the valley. 2 months before, he would have thought that he'd leapt up and waved and attracted the man's attention, but something stopped him. Something made him crouch down in the bracken and hug the dog to him to stop it barking. That night was hot. It was midsummer, and Francis decided to sleep outside. He went and he lay on the rabbit-nibbled turf beside the stream, and he looked up and he saw the stars with the Milky Way arching over him. And then he turned and he looked down at the dark grass, and there in the grass were glowworms, their lights pulsing slowly, slowly, even as the stars were pulsing above. And it was as if the ground dissolved and he was neither upwards nor downwards, but tumbling through the firmament which streamed around him. In the winter, when the frost had burned back the bracken, Central Office sent an emissary to find out how Francis had been getting on. The man came and he knocked at the door. There was no answer. He opened the door and went inside, and it was clear that no one had lived there for a very long time. The hearth was cold. Weeds had germinated and then died. There was nothing except the slight fragrance of ripe apples. The man placed Francis's redundancy notice on the windowsill, as he had done with so many others before. And then he looked out at the trees and the spaces between the trees that would soon be filling up with snow. He pulled on his warm deerskin gloves in preparation for the journey back to town.